Thank you, Richard, for reminding us that trust is so important. So already worth over 13 billion, the UK cyber sector is growing, but so too are the challenges the sector faces. While cybersecurity is still often undervalued, its significant untapped potential can fuel not only the resilience of the UK, but drive innovation and growth across the economy to meet the challenges of the next decade. Now is the time to invest in our cyber culture, leadership and places to maximise their impact and force change at a systemic level. We have the talent, ambition and opportunity to lead in cybersecurity. But how do we align growth with resilience and make strategic choices that benefit the economy? Please welcome my panel onto the stage. So let's kick off. So when you look at the UK's industrial strategy, where does cyber sit today? Is cyber being treated as a strategic growth sector, as a technical afterthought, or even a burden that's optional? Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself and kick off with your thoughts on that?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Elliott. I'm Deputy Director for Cybersecurity at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And the industrial strategy was very consciously designed to be not covering every sector of the economy. We were making a conscious choice to pick the winners, those sectors which were actually going to actively grow the economy to achieve our ambitions. And we consciously put cybersecurity in there alongside with its peers, the other 5 frontier technologies, because we know that the cybersecurity sector is a high growth sector. It has had double-digit growth every year we've measured it since 2017. It is clearly going to be continuing in demand. We heard from Richard Horn this morning telling us about the threats. The demand for cyber services will continue to grow, and the UK is a leader at this. We have huge capabilities. So cyber is definitely in the industrial strategy primarily because it is a growth sector. But your question is saying, well, you know, we also need to have underpinning resilience across all parts of the economy. And therefore, cybersecurity does have that horizontal role in the industrial strategy as well, as part of our national resilience. But you could say the same of many of the other frontier techs as well. You know, AI is in there because it is a high growth area. It is going to be one of those parts of the economy which helps make us wealthier. But it is also going to be something that drives growth and drives resilience of the whole economy. So, you know, you've got to put it in a box, and that's what we've done.
Kirsten?
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kirsten. I've been investing in early-stage technology companies for well over 15 years now. I started my career at Seacount. We were first money into companies like Revolut, TransferWise, UiPath, really transformational businesses. And then after that, I launched Cylon, which was Europe's first cybersecurity accelerator, where we really focused and sort of harnessed on the UK's great heritage with cybersecurity. And we wanted to spin out more innovative companies. We backed some incredible founders and businesses like Tessian, Immersive Labs, Risk Ledger, and many, many more. I think in total we supported over 60 companies. And now in my current job, I sit within Octopus Ventures running a pre-seed fund called First Check Fund. We're sector agnostic. We've invested in 60 companies in the last 3 years, and we're really looking to back exceptional founders building transformational businesses. And I think for me, cybersecurity really sort of ticks those boxes. So we're proud to have backed a number of cybersecurity companies with the current fund that I manage. And then coming back to your question around the industrial strategy, I completely agree with what's been said so far. I think AI and cyber now go hand in hand. I think the world is changing at a rapid pace. You know, historically, software was built for humans, not necessarily machines. And I think with the adoption of AI, you need trust, and that's where I think cybersecurity has a huge role to play. So it's certainly an area from an investment standpoint that we actively look at, and delighted that it is core to the industrial strategy at a government level.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali El Kafarani. Originally a mathematician and cryptographer. I worked both in industry and in academia. Most recently, as in like more than a decade ago, I moved from HP Labs to Oxford University at the math department to co-found the cryptography group. And that was a project specialized in post-quantum cryptography and funded by NCSC and GCHQ. And 4 years in 2018, I spun out PQ Shield as a company specialized in post-quantum cryptography. And since then, as PQ Shield, we have grown into a international company where we're working from 12 countries. We worked closely with different governments, but mainly in the US, co-authoring the new standards for cryptography. For those who are familiar with what post-quantum cryptography is, basically changing the underlying math so that the problems that we believe are difficult to solve for classical computers are also difficult to solve for quantum computers, and helped other governments as well, worked with the National Cybersecurity Center here in the UK and elsewhere, and built a portfolio of products around post-quantum cryptography. Now, back to the question around cybersecurity and where it sits. They're asking the most difficult question as the first question, the most challenging one. So usually you leave the most difficult one or the biggest message to the end of the panel and basically convey it. But that's what they decided. So where does it sit? Where does cybersecurity sit at the moment? I think it's standing up somewhere. It's not sitting. There's no place for cybersecurity at the moment. It's just squeezing itself between tech and defense. And, well, you know what? Yeah, let's label it high growth and put it somewhere nice as well, give it a nice place. This is not where cybersecurity should be at the moment. In my humble opinion, and with the experience that I've had so far, I do believe that the UK government needs to, and now that we're celebrating 10 years of Cyber UK, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 years of NCSC, right? Almost 10 years, I think November 2015 was established. So I think it's time now that we've moved from GCHQ to NCSC, and now time for the government to make a pledge and say that cybersecurity itself is a core infrastructure. It's not just a support to our CNI. It is in itself an infrastructure. Like you have steel structure for this, not to fall on us all. Cybersecurity is our infrastructure. You can wake up tomorrow and there is no AI. All of you who have ChatGPT or whatever on your phone, it's not working. Life goes on. There is no quantum computer. Life goes on. There is no cybersecurity. You can't even shop for your grocery. That's how important and embedded in our daily lives at the moment, cybersecurity.
Thanks, Ali.
Why is it not an infrastructure? That's my answer.
Rachel.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Rachel O'Connell, and I'm a founder and CEO of Trust Elevate. And I've spent the last 3 decades looking at how we can create a safer and more secure internet. My background, my PhD, was analyzing pedophile activity on the internet and looking at the implications for investigative strategies. And I spend a lot of my time in the standards, kind of geeky world of standards. I'm the author of the PAS 1 to 96 Age Checking Code of Practice, which has now become an ISO 27566. And I'm working with the OpenID Foundation and ISO on how we tackle the issue of delegated authority. How do we understand AI and AI agents? How do we give an AI agent an identity? How do we bind that to a human? How is that connected to a business? How do we enable them to operate across domains? How do we handle the situation that different AI agents will sub-delegate and become autonomous? What happens if we want to switch out the brain of the AI agent so it works better with Claude on one task and a different LLM on a different task? How do we manage all of that from a cyber resilience point of view? So Trust Elevate is a platform that does that. We orchestrate IDs for the agentic AI commerce and actually all agentic AI. And we're looking at governance and compliance, and critical to that is cyber resilience. It's absolutely critical, because if you're like, hey, I want to go on a holiday with 5 people and they've got kids, so you get the AI agents to sort everything out, your experiences and everything. We're working with Visa on their trusted agent protocol. If your bank account is drained, or an enterprise's bank account is drained, there are huge problems with that. So we're working very hard on those sorts of issues. And I will give a legal perspective to back up your perspective. NIS, DORA, the AI Act, all of them look at supply chain and liability within those. And we've had a wonderful 72 hours about 3 weeks ago where we had the Meta and Google case was being heard in relation to whether or not and to what degree they're responsible to the harms that happen to young children. And the court decided that, the platforms designed their AI and their deep learning, machine learning AI algorithms to surface content to vulnerable kids that they had already decided were vulnerable. That is a design deficit, and therefore the critical thing which will change all the cyber resilience is that a ruling against them, they're held responsible. And then we had another ruling in Delaware where the judge said, you know what, insurers and underwriters, these guys are liable, so you don't have to cover directors and officers. They are directly liable, nor do you have to cover the fines, because this wasn't the result of an accident, this was deliberate. Now, if you look at the other couple of cases, Broadband in relation to a cloud service provider didn't put sufficient cyber resilience mechanisms in place that created massive incident, and the charities and companies had to pay for it. The insurers then sued the cloud service provider for negligent their cyber resilience was very different. So what we're seeing is a massive sea change in terms of the insurers not underwriting this, which means it will go from being a where do I fit issue to a board level issue. Because if your board of directors are going to be directly liable, then that changes everything. So I think we're headed in the right direction. Right?
Simon?
Perfect. Thank you. Great to be here this morning. My name's Simon. I'm at the University of Bristol. Not really an academic. I did over 30 years in industry, most of that at HP Labs, where I did bump into Ali a few years ago. The last 10 years, I was director of cybersecurity research, so thinking about research strategy and then how to turn that into innovation and impact in a corporate space. I guess I'm mostly on stage here because I was one of the lead authors for the Cyber Growth Action Plan, which was a piece of the homework question, which was look at the cyber sector, what levers might you pull to help it grow, how should we think about the cyber sector? And some of that, I took it as, okay, in the context of the industrial strategy, what's the right way to think about cyber, and how do we do that? And we, of course, the few key points, and they've been laboured already, the cyber sector is growing healthily, that's a good tick, but the problem is getting bigger. And so how well is it understood around the connection between all the other sectors that have been picked as winners, as Andrew laid out? They need cyber resilience, and therefore they need a healthy cyber sector to grow into it. So how do we create a virtuous cycle, if you like, between those sectors that know they need better cyber resilience? They need to drive the demand in a way that's going to pull on our cyber sector to help it do, at a meta level, product market fit, if you like, so that we can have a healthy sector helping ourselves be resilient, creating more sovereignty. So that was, the ideal state we'd like to see in terms of the way people thinking about cyber in the context of the industrial strategy. Are we there? I would say no, in the sense that I like some of the other nuances around it's not seen as a critical infrastructure in the way it needs to be. I think there's some huge challenges, and don't get me wrong, I think this community is doing a fantastic job and done a great job over the last 10 years to get to where it is, but the problem's getting bigger, the threat's getting bigger, and the challenge is we need those other sectors to do multiple things. They need to do the fundamentals, and it's still trying to, even being fast followers in this world is a challenge for some of those other sectors to do cyber well. but we're arguing for more. It's like the threat is changing every year. We need to anticipate, so we need innovation. And that innovation and that demand signal needs to come from those sectors so that our own sector can define and do the kind of product fits that will allow our categories to grow and our firms to grow in the UK. So that was, I guess it's like, yes, it's the right direction. It's not a bad narrative, but the reality of what needs to be done, yeah, we need to do more.
I think the demand side of that is the important bit. You know, what drives the innovation ultimately is people wanting things. So you mentioned the Cyber Growth Action Plan, and you were the lead on that. It covers culture, leadership, and places. Which of those three do you see as kind of the weakest point, or are they all areas for improvement?
Yes, it was a perfectly formed document. It was all integral into how we argue we should deliver growth. But I think that wider case of like how we get to that virtuous cycle, I'm using language I heard yesterday, so I'm stealing it, but it's like, it's a big complex system. And it's not like you can just put a program in place and say, right, you put that program in place, prosecute it well, and you'll get to growth. It's like, now, how do we create the conditions for growth? So I think ultimately my answer is going to be culture. But just to build up to that, I think all the pieces that are needed there in the sense that we sort of see that we have, you know, the UK is a small enough place that we can coordinate things well, but we do have different kinds of strengths in different places. It doesn't all happen in London. And it's really important we capitalize on some of the strengths where we've got, whether it's demand signals that are particularly strong in one sector in one part of the country, deep capability in, let's say, Cheltenham in another part of the country, and how do we get the risk capital paying attention to those different pieces so that we get more of the sum of the parts. And we need to be able to do things like, and it is a people-based business, how do we get people with hands-on experience on some of the environments where the incidents are happening so they actually understand the challenges that the demand side is facing? How do we bring that out faster? That all happens in locations, in places. So that's why places is there. Step back a second. We said leadership, and I think we do need leadership focused on growth. Because I think we have great cyber leaders, we have great community builders, but I think leadership for growth has got some different skill sets in terms of convening and seeing there is a demand signal, but there's also a supply opportunity. How do we bring those together in the right way? How do we create design partnerships? How do we pull things out of universities where we're really good at knowledge creation, but turn it into knowledge exploitation? That requires leadership. So we do need it all over the place, and it's all the way in that spectrum from university to buying signals. But I think the conditions for those leaders to operate, it's a cultural question. And I go back to that. It's a complex system. Yes, we can and should put programs in place to train people, whether it's the Cyber Runway program to help people be coached and be better, whether it's convening things in systematic ways between risk capital and founders and CISOs. We need to do that convening. But we can't pretend there's one programmatic answer. It's like, no, we need people to buy into the wider understanding of it, and that's a culture of cyber innovation and cyber growth. In the context of which I think this community can do that by joining the dots, but we also need it to come from a wider societal culture that understands the threat and buys into the need for resilience, so that back to the boards are paying attention the right ways, which will make it easier for some of this culture of innovation to thrive.
Okay. Andrew, do you want to come in on that?
Simon, when I first read your recommendations on leadership, I was there thinking, oh my goodness, do we need more leaders in this space? I mean, there's too many cooks. But I think over the last year, I've sort of come to see that actually the mission is growth. We're all supposed to be on a growth mission. And if I look at it from my perspective within government departments, we have in every Whitehall department, there's somebody responsible who is our leader for growth. Mm-hmm. And the trouble with that is that everybody else thinks, well, that's Bob's problem. Whereas actually, all leaders really need to ensure that they are with this growth mission. And we see this with CISOs. CISOs in government departments, what is their sort of primary objective? What is the CISO role? And you could ask that question to CISOs across the economy, and they'll all give you something different. But I think that certainly, if government's leading by example and driving growth, they need to understand that actually there is a responsibility in the decisions they make about how that is going to drive growth. Are they supporting UK startups? Are they supporting UK industry? Are they supporting you folks? Are we doing design partnerships with you? Are we putting your products into place? And that is a growth leadership role, but it doesn't just sit with, these people over here. It sits with many, many of us. And a lot of the people who are leading on this are here in Glasgow this week. And I really hope that we can try and, talk more about that.
Yeah. Well put. So, Andrew, can I just follow up on that? You mentioned CISOs. Do you think CISOs are empowered? These are Chief Information Security Officers, just in case. Do you think they're empowered and have the budget to actually be able to make those investment decisions, to be able to use those innovative products to support their security?
Well, I'm sure if you asked the CISOs, they would probably say no. But the CISOs are our government leaders for defending. But the CISO role is not just about protect and defend. The CISO role is about how can you actually get ahead of the threat. And to get ahead of the threat, you have to innovate. You have to support the standards that these folks have been talking about, the blood, sweat, and tears they put into doing. But it's not good enough just to build the standards. You've got to then buy to the standards. And that means partnering and implementing. And yes, I think that CISOs do have that role. But to enable them to do that role, that's where you get to Simon's culture point. You have to change the culture of the organizations that they're operating in to support them, because no one can do it on their own.
Thanks. So, Kirsten, from a VC perspective, is the UK currently an attractive environment for cyber investment?
I would say yes. I think if you look at Europe, I think the UK really is leading, but I think we're really lagging behind the US. And I think that sort of lagging behind gap is just getting larger and larger. So I think everything that was being spoken about so far this morning, I think we've got incredible heritage, we've got fantastic talent. I think there's sufficient capital, and that might be slightly controversial, but there's really active angel community. There's loads of funds now looking to be sort of first money in to these companies. Where I see from a venture capital standpoint, where it's then starting to fail slightly in the UK, is the growth. And probably coming back to your point, I think that's more complex than just looking at capital alone. Are there sufficient corporates who are willing to buy software from early stage companies? And then for the investors, can they see that growth trajectory and have real confidence that actually investing in cybersecurity is going to drive the returns that they're looking for? And so I think when companies get to later stage funding, and I'm sure you can talk about this, I think for companies who get to that sort of scale stage, there's a lack of capital available. So I think at the earlier stages, there's a lot of great initiatives, a lot of great funding available, a lot of talent. But for the growth stages, I think we put in all the early legwork, and then we potentially don't necessarily reap the rewards, because ultimately founders who then have found that product market fit and they are scaling nicely, they have to go typically to the US for funding. And if you speak to US investors, they'll probably only fund you if you have a US footprint. And then you start to sort of shift where your focus is. So I think it is an attractive place to start, but I think we haven't got the sort of larger ambition yet to keep fueling that growth.
I think it's that, and I come back to that, it's the ability to invest in the products and test the products and be those first buyers gives that confidence in the product. And I'll come to you, Rachel, because we first met on NCSE for startups. Yes. And one of the things frustrated me running that program was we tried lots of different ways to bring the potential buyers, the potential users in to see what you had. With things like the online safety bill now, do you think that gives you an advantage? Is it those sorts of things that starts to drive demand, is when you have the right kind of regulation or legislation in place?
You need the regulation, and you need startups like Trust Elevate and other companies, right? No, but because companies don't want to buy a proprietary solution that meets a regulatory compliance thing. So it has to be a standard, an approach that's based on standards. So that's why I wrote the PAS 1 to 96. And then the other challenge is, because we've had lots of communication, NCSE was very helpful to us. So the challenges are that companies are like, unless it's got a gun to our heads, we're not, it's great what you're doing trying to protect kids, Rachel, that's great, but we're not doing it until the regulator is knocking on our door to enforce this. So there are companies out there that are innovative, that have to go through the whole process of writing the standards. It's a collaborative process with people. ISO 27566 means working with people in 116 countries. There's a whole regimented process that you have to go through that takes about 2 or 3 years. You then governments say, okay, now there is a standard, that's great. Let's change our legislation because now we know it's technically possible. And then there's a whole consultation period for that piece of legislation. And then there's a consultation period that the regulator has to go through. So as a startup, we're not in a sprint or marathon, we're like ultra marathon runners. You're just going to your team. This is going to take time, but stay with me, the super engineers. We will get revenue, we will get customers. But there's this whole process of building the infrastructure. We're not building a solution on top of the internet. We're laying the foundations. Here's a technical standard for age checking. Here's a technical standard for delegated authority. Here's the buy-in. Here's the certification and conformance standards. Let's speak to NIST, the technical standards people in the US. So companies like ours build the infrastructure upon which you then have the identity rails and the verification of legal authority over a parent, legal, let me start that again. We're verifying when somebody says they're the parent. I did a whole load of work with the UNHCR to say, okay, there's 2.7 million children in alternative care. We cannot have those kids excluded. We cannot, that's just not a world we want to live in. So how do we make sure that the legal guardians for those kids can actually attest that I'm the legal guard, I'm the care worker, so I can sign. So Article 8 of the General Data Protection Regulation says no company should process data of anybody under the age of 16 or in the UK 13 unless they get parental consent from the authorised holder of parental responsibility. So there's the legal driver. We put the standards in place to do that. Then I'm the leader of the development of a policy framework with UNHCR, European Commission. So we have to bring supranational organizations in to develop a policy framework that attaches to and complements the technical standard for how you verify delegated authority. That's actually the perfect blueprint for AI agents, because AI agents you sub-delegate. So there's a court order in the case of a human, kids, and that specifies their nutrition, where they're going to live, etc., whole detailed, and who has delegated authority for them, and how they can sub-delegate and how to troubleshoot. It's exactly the same for the AI context. But in both scenarios, you have to have the technical standards, you have to get government buy-in, and this is at a global level. The Canadian Trust Framework, DIAC, has to be able to interoperate and recognize the solutions that we build. Right? So there is a phenomenal amount of work that goes on. Investors are like, hey, you're not at ARR of 2 million in 18 months. We don't want to talk to you. There must be something wrong with you. So one of the pleas I would make is make a category of startups that puts us in a particular category. These are the guys that are changing the infrastructure or influencing the infrastructure to enable and build cyber resilience. So every UK child going online will be safer, because that's the ultimate mission. But there's a path that we're like ultra marathon runners trying to survive, because the companies won't use our product until there's a gun to their head. And it aligns with standards, technical standards to enable that. So there's a whole there's a whole flurry of things there, and I was really grateful for the help, and we're still trying to pursue that route, but that's what it takes to affect a massive change.
It sounds like as an innovator, you're almost ahead of the times.
Yes.
And it takes the times to catch up, and what you need is investors to hold faith.
Exactly.
Until you've caught up. Ali, are you in a similar position with your technology?
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with most of that has been said now by Kristen and Rachel. Actually, everything they've said is 100% relevant to PQ Shield and to our case and the domain that we operate in. Imagine yourself starting a company in 2018 and trying to raise funds and telling them, look, we're now designing the new standards for cryptography that is going to be replacing all the cryptography pieces, public key cryptography pieces in all our infrastructure. But this process is going to take 7 to 8 years. So 7 to 8 years, you don't have standards because they are draft standards, right? So even from a compliance perspective, you are building that infrastructure, but you go to governments and they tell you, well, sorry, it's not standards yet. I say, great, do you want me to work on that or not? If you want me to work on that, then I need to be funded, right? Because this is an infrastructure here that we're building, right? And therefore, that is exactly why I started by saying that defining cybersecurity in its entirety as a core infrastructure will change the way we look at the whole cybersecurity ecosystem, how we invest, how we buy, how we support, everything. Now, not only it is an infrastructure, it is actually a live infrastructure. So when you want to make changes, you can't just, oh, I'm going to build a new one. No, you have to fix it, you have to change it while everyone is still operating business as usual. It's a massive challenge. And then, therefore, for us as a PQ Shield, starting a business, a company in the UK is great. There is plenty of brains and talented people and motivated people to start a business here in the UK. Particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, you have a lot of people. Again, the field is moving faster than the number of talents that we are basically training to become experienced cybersecurity experts. And this is something we need to work on, as Simon said. But it is a place where you have plenty of mathematicians. You just need to turn them into cryptographers or cybersecurity experts, right? So you can start this, but then what happens is you started that business, you still can't sell because they're not standards. You're building that infrastructure and you try to navigate, we're talking about procurement, you try to navigate the UK government. I'm not sure if anyone has tried to come backstage here and find the doors. It's more difficult than actually finding backstage here. Like so many doors that you don't open and then you just keep going in rounds until you find them. It's more difficult than that. You don't know. Like I've met with so many people from the UK government that I still don't know how to make business with the UK government. How can you sell? So how is it the case that you get investors from the US and then you get prime contractors from the US crossing the ocean, coming to you, licensing, buying from you, selling to the US government, and you're still here in the UK trying to figure out how to sell something here? How does it work? Rachel mentioned, fast track. Can we have fast track for the startup ecosystem? We talk about resilience, right? And if the startup ecosystem, cybersecurity infrastructure, startup ecosystem is not resilient, our infrastructure can never be resilient. Because we're the ones who are solving the next problem that you don't see, but is coming. You will only notice it when it happens, when it's too late, as Richard said. Because with everything that we have, we're just observing and we're not actually taking action. Then we say, okay, now the problem is happening, great. The startup ecosystem is the one that is preparing you and the infrastructure and the cybersecurity ecosystem in its entirety to be ready for the next challenge. But this takes time, investment, in a period of time where, for startups, as Rachel said, you're running all the time a marathon because you want to survive long enough to see that happening, right? And I guess key point here is, if we look at cybersecurity as an infrastructure, as an enabler for our economy, if we look at this infrastructure as a necessity for business continuity, then if we look at this infrastructure, cyber infrastructure, as a capital investment and not as operational investment. I talk about post-quantum cryptography, and they talk about IT refresh, and I was like, I'm not talking IT here. But then you figure out, like, well, they don't have any other terminology to explain it. They just call it IT. So, you know, you have a printer, and you have the other things that sit next to it, you know, network security, Cisco, etc. They just put them in the same. And when we want to IT refresh things, we just do the IT refresh, right? So basically, identifying it, and I'm stressing, I can't stress enough on that, as an infrastructure that is providing us with business continuity, with resilience. We talk about security by design, and it was like, this is, I hate it now. I hate this terminology. What does it mean, security by design? What does it mean? You just talk about it, it's just like a buzzword now. Yeah, it has to be secure by design. What does that mean?
So Ali, I think you've put down a challenge there in terms of how you navigate government, in terms of how you sell your products into government.
Yes.
Andrew, do you have any thoughts on how we might be able to help in?
I mean, I'm relieved this is a government conference because I feel like they're holding back a little bit. I mean, I'm used to worse than this. I mean, all of these frustrations we hear a lot. Some of them we can help with, and some of them are really hard. The regulation one, I mean, I feel your pain on that. I was, earlier in my career, I was the bill manager for the Digital Economy Act. I was regulating online pornography in 2016, 2017. It was 10 years on, and we're still having that conversation. Yeah. And, you know, that's a really long and difficult, complex, mega hard problem, which we're still on the journey trying to fix. Regulation is never going to drive growth, I don't think. Deregulation is probably the right thing to do. On capital, which is the other thing that everybody always complains about, it's really refreshing to hear that capitals are not necessarily the problem, certainly not at the early stage, later stage. Some people tell me it's not the problem there either. Part of the problem really is how do you actually have customers? And that's really Ali's point, you know, how do you actually navigate government? And it is difficult for me inside government. Every time I find it difficult, I think of you folks and think, oh God, it's even more impossible for you folks. So yes, but that is the part which ought to be in our control. So we are working on that. Last week, my department launched the SOV AI initiative, £500 million. Part of that package is not just investing, it's access to other means of growing your company, including access to government-funded R&D and government contracts. I don't think I could quite call it the fast track to procurement, but I'd like to. And we are working on that, and there are a number of other initiatives going on across government to try and address that problem. But it is not just government's problem, and I'm really pleased that folks like Alistair Patterson at Harmonic have grabbed the bull by the horns and set up things like the UK Cyber Flywheel and forums to try and help partners through that. And I think that as we see those kind of enterprises, government needs to get in there and participate. When there are those groups of innovators and customers coming together, we need to be in the room partnering, in the room making it easy for you to understand who you should be talking to. Because our sort of default approach of saying, well, you know, we publish our ITTs on this website, this is where you go, is not really how you support innovation. But, and you know, that should help. So the statistic that I'm going around telling everybody that I'm grumpy about at the moment is the data that shows that in the last 12 months, the public sector entered into £1.5 billion worth of cybersecurity contracts. 1.5 billion of cybersecurity contracts. Now, 37% of those went to SMEs, which is exactly the same percentage as in 2019. So And that doesn't feel too bad. Like, nearly 40% of our money is going into SME market. That's good. But underpinning this, look at the market, look at the value of those contracts. So the value of that, the share of that 1.5 billion which went to SMEs is 9%. In 2019, it was 25%. So we are on a wrong trajectory there. And I think that the fact that we're prepared to recognize that and have that conversation, launch programs like Solve AI, and continue to engage with the community and talk about how we're going to solve that problem, I think is power to the elbow of folks like me to go into government and actually try and make some changes.
Simon, do you want to come in on that? And then
well, I was going to just build on Alistair's project around the cyber flywheel and just highlighted it even more, I think, because it does something quite important in terms of the idea is, can we bootstrap more of the life cycle of growing cyber companies here in the UK without them having to go validate in the US? So what does that mean? That means we would like our CISOs to be the design partners, as Andrew was saying. But it reminds me, there's something very valuable in that because selling innovation's difficult. Selling cyber innovation, I think, is even harder for reasons. It's hard to know what good looks like. It's changing fast. There's lots of reasons why cyber is particularly difficult. So you do need validation. And I think one of the things I found was, I work for a kind of big brand, big trusted brand. That kind of opens the doors and starts some things, and it helps you halfway along the validation path. What we really need to do to help some of the cyber startups in the UK is to be able to have kind of UK brands saying, this is what good looks like for security, and some of the other pieces of the UK that are authorities saying, this is what good looks like, and highlighting it and shining in it. Because that's how we'll start to get that flywheel getting bigger and build to that virtuous cycle. So,
Ali, briefly.
I'll make a quick proposal for you, for the government, right? Another one.
Do a deal on stage, why not?
Right, so you propose $500 million for AI and $2 billion for quantum technologies, right?
Yeah.
And then you ask the question, is cybersecurity an afterthought? Well, if this is not embedded in here, if this $500 million for AI does not account for the cyber infrastructure that is needed for this AI technology to be secure, if the cyber infrastructure for the 2 billion worth quantum technologies that we're building is not accounted for in this investment, then it's going to be an afterthought. It's going to be like, okay, we're going to throw $500 million here, and there's plenty of data that is now going to be processed. How are we going to secure it? What we can do is that, if this is an infrastructure, have it as an overhead, like what Innovate UK does. This 20% overhead for cyber infrastructure. If you're building a technology, you have to invest 20% in your cyber infrastructure, so I can make sure that whatever else you're building, this beautiful place here, it's got the structure that it's not going to fall on us.
So
Does that help?
So our Solve AI fund is focused on 6 areas, I think. Security is one of those 6. National security is another of those 6. And security runs through all of them as well. And it runs through all of them because really we are building a fund which is exploiting the potential for AI, but also recognizing that security is our current #1 risk around AI. You heard the minister talking this morning at length about that. So yes, we are making sure that security is front and center of all of these initiatives. Should we structure things more broadly in the kind of model you've proposed? I mean, it's a straw man. We can talk about it. Why not?
Cool. So in the last few minutes, there's lots more questions I could ask, but we'll clearly run into lunch and what have you. So if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you think would give cyber sector wings, as one drinks manufacturer would say, others are of course available? Andrew, briefly, what one thing do you think would help in this space?
I think Simon and I were both really taken by Ali's flywheel event, wrong Ali, a few weeks back. I would like to see a public sector one of those, getting government CISOs regularly into the room with innovators so that we can be genuine British government flag carriers to drive the growth of these companies. Yeah, that's what I think is the thing which would make the most difference, that I can probably get my hands around to actually be able to implement in the time frame that we want.
Cool, Kirsten?
Yeah, very similar, and in fact, I think it's been the hot topic of this panel. But the magic wand would absolutely be government adopting technology, being that seal of approval, being the design partner. Because I think once you've got that as a case study, that just enables early stage companies to continue to scale.
Ali?
To me, it would be further empowering NCSC. To move it from, now that we're celebrating 10 years of NCSC, to move it from an entity that has great set of talented people, from just writing guidelines, hey guys, it would be good if you do this, or it would be good to do that, to be that authority for the cyber infrastructure that we set the UK economy, not for the next 5 years or the 20 years, the next 50 years, to be the most resilient economy in the world. And this does not happen, will not happen, if we don't have the most resilient cyber infrastructure.
Cool. Rachel?
Well, you're not going to be surprised by what I say, which is that we need to ensure that there's a culture change, so that there's a recognition of those of us, the ultra-marathon runners, in terms of trying to keep a startup going whilst we lay the infrastructure standards, foundations there, for government to understand and be the sophisticated use case that we work with, and then for investors to also understand these people need the support to deliver on a massive change. So if we could have that culture change, that would be amazing.
Simon?
Me, I guess I agree with all these, but my pitch maybe would go somewhere between the CISO and the board. Magic wand would be, you need to do all the fundamentals, and you're working hard to do the fundamentals, but you need a separate budget for innovation. Silo it off, go spend it on helping some of our startups grow and scale.
Cool. So Cyber Essentials has been mentioned a couple of times today by the Minister and Richard and Anne. I think that's a really good example where you have a really good virtuous circle, because it does two things. So the first thing is it helps organizations be more resilient, which is good for growth, but it's also supporting an ecosystem. So, when we built Cyber Essentials originally, there was about 20 companies involved in doing the certifications. There are now 400. And we also have around 150 companies providing cyber advisor services. So that's where we are doing both. We are improving resilience, but also growing, a vibrant ecosystem of companies who are employing people, upskilling people in technology, which is a thing that's really important. So it does work. But the thing that drove it was, for good or bad, we put it into government procurement, and we said, if you want to contract with government, you must have Cyber Essentials as a basic requirement, and that drove it. So there is an example there of where this kind of thing really works. Yeah, it's something we can learn from, I think. So we'll draw that to a close. I hope you found it interesting. I've fascinating. We've got a few things myself and Andrew can have a think about over a beer and have a chat about. If you give a round of applause for the panel, please. Thank you. And thank you all for attending. Hope you have a good rest of Cyber UK.
Thank you.